Let's open up the Vintage Collection 3.75-inch figure of Dedra Meero from Andor.
Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it.
Hello there, thanks for visiting Varykino. For Star Wars 3.75-inch action figure collectors here in New Zealand, it's been a quiet few months. The last wave of TVC figures that arrived here in New Zealand was the Jodna Narwood wave that arrived back in November late last year. So when I saw that Dedra Meero was finally being released in the Vintage Collection line, I really didn't want to miss out on adding her to my collection. Thankfully, there is a new online stockist shipping in figures for New Zealand, so of course I jumped on board and ordered her, and she just arrived this morning. I love the Andor series, and we're counting down the weeks until Andor series 2. I can't wait. Back in 2023, my husband and I traveled to Celebration London, where it was fantastic to see so many actors from the Andor series live on stage, including Denise herself. And of course, while we were in London, we had to visit the real-world filming locations of the exterior shots of the ISB building on Coruscant. I love the Andor series. I'm so excited to finally be adding Dedra Meero to my 3.75-inch action figure collection. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, I'll take the figure out of the packaging so we can take a closer look at all of the details. But first, let's take a quick look at the backing card. The packaging for the Vintage Collection line is heavily inspired by the original Kenner backing cards from the 1970s and 80s. They both have a rectangular backing card shape with a black background. We have the Star Wars logo across the top with a single chrome racetrack design surrounding the movie or series logo here in red, and a single chrome racetrack design surrounding the character art to the right of the card. And they both feature the Kenner logo. I really like the fact that Hasbro nods back to the originals. The accent color for Dedra Meero is a lovely blue, used for both the nameplate up here with a white font reading Dedra Meero and also behind the figure. It's interesting that Dedra does not have a title here like many Imperial characters do for their backing cards. For the figure itself, we have one figure and one accessory, a blaster pistol. The character art here to the side is nice and clear. We can see a lot of costume details, but considering her costume is white, as we can see from the figure here, this is a little bit more of a dimly lit figure. It looks almost grey in a stark contrast to the white of the figure. I wish this was a little bit more well lit because Imperial hallways and rooms generally are quite bright. I just wish this was a little bit brighter, but other than that, I think there's some really nice detail. I like the pose. I like the little nod of Imperial lighting there in the background as well. Moving on to the back of the backing card, we can see this is a newer one with the updated backing card style, where we have the accent color used on the front of the backing card, in this case blue, for the top half of the backing card. This one is VC346, quite a recent number. We also have a blurb here on the newer backing card styles for Dedra Meero here. I'll just read it quickly. Methodical, polished, and ambitious, Dedra Meero embodies the ideals of the Imperial Security Bureau. She is ever vigilant, collecting and analyzing intelligence from across the galaxy. I kind of like this new style because we get an interesting posed image of the action figure. Here we can see the figure posed loose from the packaging with one arm behind her back and the other one holding the blaster pistol accessory. The rest of the backing card is barcode, copyright, all of that kind of stuff. We do have the Vintage Collection logo here on the back. Overall, it is a very nice, tidy card. Sometimes it's a little hard to feel nostalgic about the characters and newer series, but because she is dressed like a classic Imperial, I think this one looks really nice. I just wish the lighting for the character art was a little brighter, but other than that, a really nice figure. But for now, I really want to get her open, so let's get stuck in and open her up. So now I have Dedra Meero and her blaster pistol accessory out of the packaging so we can take a closer look. I'm so excited I finally have her, and she looks great. So as I mentioned, I ordered this one online, so I didn't get my choice of paint jobs. It's always a little bit nervous when you don't see them before they can arrive in the mail, but overall she looks pretty good. There was one tiny little thing that I noticed through the bubble, and it's really small, so it probably doesn't even really count. There is a tiny little dark dot right on her chest, right about here. It's very, very small. I'm only looking up very close up and I can just sort of notice it. If it was almost any other color tunic, you wouldn't be able to see this dot, but because it's such a clean white surface, it is just standing out there a little bit. There are a few other little paint wobbles on the back of the figure. That's less important, but we'll go over them shortly. So of course, we'll start off with the likeness here. Dedra is quite a severe character, and she's quite unusual in the fact that she is a blonde character in Star Wars. A lot of the female characters are either aliens or brunettes, so it's kind of fun to see a main character with such blonde hair. And of course she wears it in a very distinctive, quite sort of typical for an Imperial character, quite severe, all pulled back in a low bun in the back. So she doesn't have a lot of detail to her hair. It's very smooth, but I don't know how Hasbro would have done this any other way. It's kind of got a little bit of a shine to it. You can't do a lot of sort of groove lines with a smooth hair pulled back like this. And I just think it looks about as sort of appropriate as I would expect for an action figure. I do like the fact that it's raised at the front, so it doesn't look like it's just paint on a bald head. We do have a raised hairline at the front, almost creating just a little bit of shadow, so I really like that. It's painted fairly tidily around the ears, nice and tight on both sides. And then of course we've got a little sculpted bun here in the back with all of her hair pulled in nice and tight there. The hairpiece is sculpted as one with the head. It is not a separate part. In fact, this is such a low profile hairstyle. I think if we didn't have the bun on the back, she would probably be able to fit a helmet on over the top, but of course she doesn't wear one. But let's take a look at the face paint. I like the fact that she's kind of got his severe facial expression here, which is really nice. And of course we've got the modern digital printing, which is just perfect for characters like this. She's got eyebrows, nice details on the eyes, and a little bit of color on the lip there as well. Really nice. I think it's a pretty good likeness. Some actors, some characters, it's a little bit tricky, but I think this one's pretty good. Maybe not the best, but I know sometimes it can be hard to sort of shrink it down into a very small format, but I think she looks nice. Moving on down, we've got a really nice definition at the neck, and I think that is because that's an actual separation there in terms of the plastic. It's a really tight join between the neck and the tunic collar there. So I think that is really nice. I get bothered by paintwork on necklines where the color of the collar splashes up onto the neck. It always looks a bit ugly. Really nice and tight all the way along, because I'm fairly certain that's a join rather than an actual paint line. If that is a paint line, that is incredibly sharp. Very nice. And of course, when it comes to Imperials, Hasbro doesn't have too much to paint because they generally make things out of the plastic color that they're going to use. So we've got white used for the tunic. We've got some nice sculpting lines here for that flap that crosses across the front there. We can see those lines a little bit softer here on this side, but we've got a nice sharp edge on this side. This is the sort of the leading open edge of the tunic. And we've got a couple of painted details here on the chest. We've got a code cylinder on each side, painted quite nicely, I have to say. Very, very small in that metallic silver. And of course, she has a rank badge. She has a small rank badge with only 3 squares. All 3 are blue. I have to say this rank badge feels a bit smaller than the rank badges on other Imperial 3.75-inch figures. It looks quite flat because I know many of the other characters, they have 2 rows, so the whole badge looks larger, but it's almost like the actual sort of a silver base plate to the rank badge is just completely flat against the body. That base plate doesn't feel like it's raised in the sculpting, and it's only the little blue squares, the rectangles that are actually raised and then painted. I will compare that to a couple of other Imperial figures because I have a hunch there might be some reused parts in the lower half of this figure, so I do want to do some comparisons with a few other notable Imperial characters like Director Orson Krennic and Grand Admiral Thrawn. So we'll do a bit of comparison there, but the rank badge I feel is just a little bit flatter, and on the other figures, as if memory serves me, have a bright sort of silver, a really sort of vibrant vibrant silver metallic paint for the base. This one is quite dark, to be honest. It's reading almost like just a dark grey rather than a shiny metallic silver. If you sort of look up really close, the rank badge looks darker than the code cylinder next to it. And I generally think of those as being very similar in color there. So I'm not quite sure what's going on. It's really hard to look at these things close up. These are really, really small compared to my fingers. I'm looking at them really close up. There is a tiny little smudge of that gray color, whether it's a dark metallic or just a flat gray. Tiny little smudge right at the top left hand corner, and another one kind of more towards the right edge. So it doesn't have quite a hard edge. I think that would have been rectified if the badge was actually lifted off the tunic a little bit more, give it some sort of easier edges to follow there. But that is going to be very specific to my figure. Fingers crossed other fans have ones with just a little bit of a tidier paint job there, because we just have such a stark white base color. There's just really no hiding. If this was a dark grey tunic or those sort of olive drab ones, little tiny paint floors would kind of disappear there. So unfortunately, because she wears white, it's very obvious. The other major painted accessory on this figure is the sculpted belt. So of course, for the Imperial belts, they are sculpted as generally it's the same piece as the lower section of the tunic. So of course you can see we've got cutouts on the side to help with flexibility in their legs. So the lower half of the tunic, and generally the belt as well, is made out of one piece of that flat flexible plastic there. You can sort of see it flexing there from the side, while the top part is of that rigid plastic. So sometimes there's a subtle texture difference or sometimes a color difference. I am quite pleased to see that there is a really good symmetry between these two pieces. They look like they're made out of the same plastic, and the white is a very good match. There are different tones of white. Hers is a very sort of crisp white. Some other characters it's a little bit more of a cream, and other ones just look like that sort of almost just so brilliant white. Really keen to see her next to Grand Admiral Thrawn to compare white tunics, and Krennic of course as well. But unfortunately, there's something that I notice with the modern vintage collection figures is that Hasbro really struggles to paint the belts on these figures as tidily as I would like. So of course the top part is joined into the lower half of the figure at the belt. It's where we get the articulation point. You can see the moving here. But for some reason, if I just move her arm out of the way, they never seem to paint the top part of the belt completely properly. There's always like a little patch missing. I really noticed this on a recent Grand Admiral Thrawn figure. I was hunting around and I noticed it on present on a lot of other Thrawn figures that were stocked at my local store. It wasn't just mine, unfortunately. And I can see that we have that same sort of issue here. The top of her black pouch here is unpainted, so we can see the white base plastic because it's made of the same plastic as this section. They have simply painted the belt black. In terms of the actual silver belt buckle on the front, that looks nice. Doesn't have a lot of definition to the little metal detail. It usually looks like little stacked circles to kind of make a little bit of a pyramid. On this one, it just looks a little bit more like a point. Rather than little stacked rings. It doesn't really have any definition. I know we're talking about a very small figure here, but it just looks like a little sort of a raised point in the center of her belt. And we've got one little silver stud to her left of the belt buckle there, but unfortunately the paint on this one's just come down a little bit. You can see the silver if I catch the light. It's a little bit hard to show. The silver on that stud has just traveled a little bit below the actual 3D sculpting for that stud, so it's a little bit kind of a smudge down, but thankfully the sort of the shiny black paint used for the belt kind of catches the light, so it does hide that a little bit. We've also got just a tiny little bit of black traveling down below the belt here. Again, it's just the white that is really letting this figure down. It's accurate, of course, but it does mean that any little paint flaw, because we're dealing with black and white, the strongest contrast. You can see the underside of the belt is also suffering for that sort of a lack of complete paint coverage. The bottom of this black pouch is completely white. We have a corner on this one that is missing, and then if we turn it around to the back, which of course you can't see unless you're opening your figures, you can see that we do have quite a few wobbles. The top line on this at least looks a little bit straighter because this is where the articulation is cutting through, so that's a separate piece. The top of the belt is actually painted quite nicely across the back. We've got reasonable black coverage there, but you can see the lower section here. I've got a section where the black paint goes up a little bit. There is a black smudge that goes down, and then on this side it's like the paintbrush has missed this section here as well. It's not caught to the corner of this pouch and not into this bit. I have to say the sculpting along the top of the belt kind of dips here, which is kind of unusual. I thought maybe it was just the paint throwing my eyes off, but there is like a dip in the belt sculpt. Kind of dips down, which is kind of interesting because in a costume sense, these would be made out of thick tooled leather. I don't know that they would necessarily dip like that. They're quite rigid if you've ever worn a Imperial costume. It just looks a little bit unusual, but of course that's from the back. I like the nipped in waist. I want her to look like a female character. I don't want her to look like they have simply used a male Imperial torso for this figure and then stuck a custom head on it, because of course that's usually what a lot of fans have had to do over the years. I wanted her to have a nice custom figure. She looks like she's got a female figure, nice and nipped in there, even if it's just a little less obvious from the back. We've got the tunic flaring out nicely, and we can see that we've got the seam lines that are present on the Imperial tunics here in the back, starting from sort of the back here, curving on down to the back hem, and also down the backs of the sleeves. Of course, they are based on military sort of uniforms, so they follow very formal sewing pattern lines. We've also got the seam down at the front, so there are two seams featured in the sculpting there. We've got a very tiny little sort of seam here matching up with the collar gap there. You can see that tiny little seam running down the front just to sort of pull things in. It looks really, really nice. I like just the subtle wrinkles for the tunic, just looking like something fabric, but not too wrinkly. You know, Imperials have got to look sharp and stylish in their outfits there. So just a right amount of wrinkles, not looking too smooth. Of course, we don't want to look like the animated version of Grand Admiral Thrawn. He was very smooth with his tunic. We want to look real world. So let's take a look at the lower half of the figure, because I get the feeling this is going to be fairly familiar. The lower half of Dedra Meero's Imperial outfit consists of black pants and black knee-high shiny leather boots, or riding boots. Of course, the pants are also a riding style, often seen in sort of military formal officer uniforms here, where they've got this unusual sort of peak starting out from the hips, flaring out towards the knees, and then tucking in into the top of the boots there. So it's fun to see the modern Imperial officers referencing the original trilogy era costumes as well. It always slightly bothered me that Grand Admiral Thrawn in Rebels didn't wear pants that had these flares, despite the fact that we see them on so many other Imperial characters. So I was really happy to see Dedra wearing these, because she's such a prominent female character. It was fun to see them giving her the same style of pants as all of the classic original trilogy characters there. So the unfortunate thing is, because she's wearing a white tunic and black pants, the split in the side of her tunic is so obvious because it's just such a stark contrast. Now, that split doesn't exist in the actual costume. It is simply here to give us some flexibility for the legs, so it's kind of a little bit obvious. And I know I tend to err on the side of accuracy rather than articulation, but yeah, it does unfortunately show up a little bit. You kind of got to sort of hide it with some clever arm placement there, but we will check out the articulation shortly. I like the way that the pants are gathered and sort of sculpted, like they're tucked into the boots. The thigh section comes just here, just at the top of the boots, so you almost don't see the fact that there is articulation there. I know it's black on black, it's kind of hard to show, but I really like this style. And then in the back, you can see where that cuts in there. I'm trying to show so you can see the sort of the wrinkles on the back of the pants, and then we've got the articulation peg here. Something I really do like is just the contrast that Hasbro's managed to achieve with the gloss shine on the boots as opposed to the matte finish for the what would be fabric on the costume for the pants there. So at least it doesn't just look like just black plastic from the waist down here. It does actually look like separate components components, which is nice. And I like to think that, of course, the Imperials working at the ISB headquarters are going to keep their boots really shiny. They're not really seeing combat all the time, so I like to think of their boots being really nice and glossy. They are relatively featureless, but they do have this seam up the back with this little strap sort of closing the boot there at the top across the back. Not something seen on all of the Imperial costumes. I get the feeling that this was introduced for a specific Imperial character, and Hasbro simply reuses this piece. I'm not entirely sure if these buckle straps are actually present on Dedra's costume. We don't often see her boots from the back. We often see her sort of at discs or, you know, facing forward there, but I don't mind. It's a very small detail, and it doesn't have any sort of paint application there. Just adds a little bit of something to the boots, and obviously the very real world way that they would be getting these costume boots on and off on set. We do have articulation at the ankles there with a little bit of a heel sculpted in there, but yeah, riding boots are pretty featureless to start with anyway. But I do like the sort of the creases that we've got there around the ankles. Yeah, the lower half of the body looks good. Just this cutout, this one here is kind of sitting quite tight. It's almost a little less noticeable. This one is already looking like it's kind of flexed wide, so that's just a little bit unfortunate that it's just showing the black of the top of the legs so strongly there. So I've already started moving her around a lot. I'm expecting pretty standard articulation from her, so let's check it out. So she's got very short hair. She should be able to turn her head in all sorts of directions all the way around. She's got a pretty reasonable up and down actually, which is quite nice. She can get her chin resting on the collar of her tunic. That's actually a really deep look, and then all the way back. It actually stops before her hair touches, so that's actually a pretty good look there. All the angles really nice. So she does have kind of peaked collars, shoulders here a little bit, but they don't overlap over the top of the arms, so that should be not too limiting. So hopefully her arm is going to tuck in. She's a bit tight out of the packaging. Just going to lift her other arm. You can see the articulation pegs there very easily at the top. When she's got her arms all the way up, they fit almost completely underneath. She's quite straight there. Nice and easy. Let's swivel. She's stiff, but I gotta say, I do prefer slightly stiff joints compared to ones that are really loose. I do get anxious when especially the leg joints on new figures are loose. You generally want them to start out a little bit tighter. That's pretty tight. I was fairly certain she wasn't going to be straight up in the air because of the sort of the width here of the tunic, but that's pretty high. Now let's get her arms back down. She's definitely loosening up a little bit now that I'm flexing her joints a little bit. Now I do want to be able to get her into some good holding poses. But yes, unfortunately she doesn't actually have that many accessories. Something I wanted to sort of touch on with her accessories is the Black Series 6-inch figure of Dedra Meero came with both the same blaster pistol, obviously just a bit larger, and a data pad. So many of her scenes are in sort of the Imperial offices where she's not carrying a blaster. She is carrying data pads. You know, she's intelligence, and I think it's a shame that this figure does not include a data pad accessory. It's such a small, flat little piece of plastic. It would just really elevate this so much. So she's got hands that look like she wants to hold something. But unfortunately, I've only got one blaster pistol to hold. So just taking a look at her hands, now that we can sort of swivel her arms out, you can see that she's got an extended trigger finger on her right hand. And the fingers almost look like it's extended for a trigger finger, but it's not. It's actually joined to the fingers underneath. So that one would be for, you know, staff weapons, or her fingers, of course, because she's a female character and she's in scale to male characters. She's got very tiny hands compared to some of the other figures that I've been looking at. And she's not even wearing gloves either. So she's got really tiny hands for a 3.75-inch scale figure, but they look really nice. Sometimes I'm worried about the fingers looking like sort of clumpy plastic when you deal with them on the scale, but they're actually got really nice points to them. Just really nice. It's sort of quite refined there. They don't look clumsy. They look right. And you can see they are, I don't know that we have sort of rocking articulation here. They're kind of, just trying to get the camera to focus. They're going all the way down. The hands look like they're pegged into her sleeves. So I don't see, sometimes we have up and down or side to side articulation. These look like they are just swiveling hands. We don't have that as articulation, but then I've only got the one blaster pistol for her to hold, so I don't know that that is necessarily a loss. But if she was holding a lightsaber, I can get her elbows close enough that I think I'd be able to get a reasonable pose. Perhaps if you want to do some interesting mashup or some sort of expanded universe character, or perhaps use her torso for a custom character, she can get her elbows close enough to the body that we could achieve that. Her elbows look nice. I'm not going to get her like, you know, completely folded up without it looking just a little bit odd, because her elbows are sitting out a little bit wider. But yeah, it's just a shame she doesn't have a data pad. That was the one thing that I really thought would be the most perfect accessory for her to hold. Of course, you can always do the thing where you sort of flip the arms around behind so that they can sort of do the Grand Admiral Thrawn sort of pose there. That always works if you don't want her to be holding a blaster pistol. Yeah, okay. Let's move the waist. Okay, she's a bit clicky. It's not making the loud clicks, but it kind of, there's stopping points. Oh, she is clicking. Yeah, she's a clicky one. Okay, so sometimes they move quite smoothly. She's got the stopping points where she clicks into a specific place, but she does, it's not really fighting me. I can move her around. Generally, because there are such strong costume details with the lines, I don't generally move characters too far beyond center. It starts looking a little bit awkward. And oh, she does not really have a front and back. That is really minimal. She's not wiggling. Yeah, there's a little bit there, but it's not really, yeah, a little bit. Had to loosen that one up a little bit, actually. It starts to look, sort of, you can see the wrinkles sort of showing a little bit more in the back than when I tuck her down. You can see I start exposing a gap there in the back if I pull her up. So that was, it was a little bit tight, but yeah, she does have a little bit. I wasn't sure if that was actually going to start to loosen up, but it's odd. I can really pull her torso up. I'm actually seeing the gap in between. So she's got a little bit of a lean, a little bit of an adjustment there, which generally I don't use that for posing, more for just finding the balance to make her stand up. So she does have that. She's very stiff on my figure. Let's work out the legs. Okay, nice and easy. We do have those splits in the side that are fully opening up. You can see them there. They do have a slight circular sort of shape to the top of them to try and avoid splitting that plastic up higher. But without putting too much pressure on her, I can get her legs out to that wide. You can see the articulation style there on the inside. We do to be getting a lot of the figures with this articulation style, which is nice to see. We do have, just looking, if I can lift this up a little bit, we've got that cut through. It's very hard to show because it's black on black and it's shadowed. We've got that cut across so we can swivel the legs out. You can see I can swivel the thighs. Again, it's just for kind of, for me personally, it's going to be used for sort of getting her legs into a pose where she's going to stand upright. Because when you start turning the legs to the side, you start making these pants stick out a little bit odd from straight. But yeah, that's nice and easy. Testing the knees. Oh, those are actually nice and easy. Not the tightest of knees. She's not quite right angled there. It's like a little bit lower. But we do have a lot of gathering in these kind of flared pants there around the knees, so that's not surprising. We've got sort of all this gathered plastic in the back of her pants. Testing out her ankles. That's a pretty good point. There we go. And the other ankle. Yep, good point there too. A little bit, oh yeah, pretty far forward there as well. Some of the figures I've opened recently, they really don't have much movement there in the ankles. And we can roll the ankles side to side there as well. So now I've gone and moved her legs all around. She does seem to be a figure that's not going to be too hard to stand up, because because she's got a pretty reasonable range of articulation, and she just doesn't have bulky accessories to throw off her center of balance. So of course she doesn't have anything much on her back. She doesn't even have a large hairstyle or helmet. So yeah, she looks pretty good. I'm of course a little bit annoyed with some of the paintwork there, but thankfully it's mostly on the back. And I'm looking up really close at that rank badge and that tiny speck on her chest, which is unfortunately, it's either in the plastic or a tiny drop of paint on the plastic that refuses to budge. To be honest, it's so small. Once I put her back, I can still kind of see it, but that's one of those things where if you stop looking at it, you're not really going to notice it. And yeah, it's because it's white, that's always the risk with these figures. Any tiny little paint drop is going to show up so prominently. If she was like the Mandalorian, you're never going to notice a spot that small with all of the color details in there, but she looks great. Okay, let's take a look at her blaster pistol. She comes, and we do see her in the show, so this isn't just a made-up blaster. So she comes with a Power 5 blaster pistol accessory. I do like the plastic that Hasbro is using for their accessories. It's got like a little bit of flex to it, but it's not like a completely brittle one. I'd say this one would probably break if I put a lot of force to it, but there's some really nice fine detail on this, and it's so small because of course it's kind of scaled to her hands. It's really tiny. It's going to be hard to show the full level of detail on this, but it's really nice. I can feel all the little ridges, all of the little detail work on it. It's nice. It is cast in this dark, it's either very dark gray, I think it's a dark gray, just based on the color of her boots. I don't think it's a true black. I think it's dark gray, like a sort of a gunmetal gray. No paint work, and we do have an enclosed trigger guard, which is quite small, but then she does have very small fingers. So let's go ahead and see how well she's going to hold this one. Dealing with some very small details on this figure, a little bit smaller than I'm used to. Okay, so the grip goes in her fingers nicely. Just got to line up that tiny little finger with the trigger guard. Don't want to break her finger. It's very small. That went in there pretty well. Just took a little bit of a nudge and it goes in there. You can even see that there is actually just a little bit of air around her finger as well. So that's not even a completely tight fit. And she holds that nice. Now, my little talking point about this particular blaster, as I was mentioning about the data pad accessory that the Black Series figure comes with. Dedra wears kind of two outfits in the first series of Andor. She has her sort of her office attire, as we see her here, with her white tunic, black pants and boots. When we see her outside, when she is walking to work or on Ferrix, she generally wears a black Imperial cap and sort of like a white coat. And now when she's wearing the white coat on Ferrix, she has an additional belt over the top of her white coat with a black holster with this blaster pistol in it. So when she's wearing this outfit, we see her sort of at work where she's not carrying a blaster pistol. We only see her really with this when she's in that slightly different sort of outdoor outfit with a hat and a coat. Now personally, I would love to see Hasbro make all the different versions of all the characters. So I don't know if we'll ever see that second version of Dedra with a coat and a hat as well. But that would be where I would put this accessory, because she doesn't use this blaster pistol really when she's in this outfit. I think of her, we certainly see her wielding this on Ferrix when she is in that additional sort of on location outfit. I would prefer this figure to come with the data pad and then get a second version with the coat, hat and blaster pistol to go into a holster, because she doesn't have a holster with this outfit. There is no holster there, and it always somehow seems just a little bit unusual when characters have a blaster pistol that they can't actually stow on their body. She's not walking around at work with her blaster pistol in her hand. So yeah, it's a bit unfortunate that when it comes to, I hate comparing them, but when it comes to the Black Series versus the TVC Vintage Collection line, I feel like the Black Series got the better assortment of accessories because they got both the blaster pistol and the data pad. I know I usually I don't mind when the figures don't come with accessories, or they seem like they kind of gave them made up accessories, but this was such an obvious thing that we see her carry and use in a lot of her scenes. It just felt like that should have been something that she would be holding. You know, she could carry it under her arm or hold it with two hands. but we have a blaster pistol instead. I know that it's tricky trying to sell a lot of Imperial characters. They often sadly end up as peg warmers despite being so important in Star Wars, so I understand why Hasbro would give her a blaster pistol despite the fact that she's not really using it in her office. But I think just the addition of a data pad would have just, yeah, considering she sells for the same price point as a lot of other characters that come with jetpacks and helmets and 3 blasters and things like that, I think it would have sort of added just a little bit more value to the price point for her. But that's just a little bit of a tangent. You know, I try not to get too sort of negative about accessories being there or not there and stuff like that, but I think in this case I would have loved to have seen a datapad accessory. So I mentioned earlier that I have a couple of other Imperials because I really do want to see if these pants and boots are reused pieces. I don't think they're necessarily way off scale for Dedra, though I do appreciate that fans would probably prefer to see pants sculpted for this more slender female character like they have with the tunic. So let's go ahead and line up a few other Imperial characters and take a closer look. So for a quick comparison, I grabbed 3 other Imperial action figures from the vintage collection line that I've opened up recently. From left to right, first off we have Moff Gideon from Return of the Jedi, VC284, Director Orson Krennic from Rogue One, VC302, Grand Admiral Thrawn from the Ahsoka live-action series, VC337, and Dedra Meero from Andor Series 1, VC346. I was curious to see the 3 white ones lined up here because the whites are different. You can see Dedra's tunic is the whitest of all 3 characters, which makes sense. We do see her in a clean, stark office environment a lot of the time. We do see Krennic out in the field a few times. He's wearing his cape in a lot of angles. And of course, Thrawn has been lost on a pair of deer for a while, so it kind of makes sense that his isn't as clean and fresh and new. Now, of course, now that I have all 4 of these figures lined up, it becomes really clear which ones are reusing parts. When it comes to the 3 male characters, a lot of the figures are identical, with the exception of the rank badges and on Thrawn because he has a few other details, but there are a lot of sculpting lines, particularly on the tunic and lower tunic, that are very similar to the other 2 figures you can see, and of course the sleeves are very similar. And now that I've lined all 4 of them up, I can see that yes, the pants and the boots are identical across all 4 characters. They do just kind of sit differently with the sort of hip articulation, and the colors give them a bit of a different look. So hers do kind of look smaller from certain angles because they are black, but when I compare the sculpting lines, just, yeah, they're the same. I don't know that it bothers me that much, to be honest. They do look in proportion for her, and because these aren't fitted tight pants, they're flared out, I can kind of get away with them being the same size as the men's pants here, even though technically I'm sure the actress for Dedra is a more of a slender build than these other characters, so it doesn't really bother me. I would completely understand why the Imperial officer boots are identical because they're pretty featureless, they're black, shiny, they look fine reused there. You can see the belts are very different. Hers is a much smaller in terms of the width, and she looks a little bit thicker in the belt when I turn her around, but from the front, the belt buckle and everything just looks a little bit more sort of slender for the female frame, and the arms are very different, which I'm glad. I was hoping they wouldn't reuse the arms because the arms do look a bit more like a male build, and she's just got much smaller hands, so I'm really glad that the upper body for her especially is quite unique to her. And you can see she's just a little bit shorter than the other 3 characters as well, which I feel is really fitting for her. I really do hope we get more figures of her character. Of course, she has that slightly different outfit with the coat and hat on Ferrix, and of course we know that she's going to be in Andor Series 2. Counting down the weeks, I really, really want to find out more about her character and what's going to happen. Now, of course, I'm so excited to finally have her. When it came to the Andor Series series, I really felt like Hasbro didn't make very many figures at all for the vintage collection line, and Andor in general just didn't get quite as much merchandise compared to, say, the Mandalorian series. So at least now that we are really close to getting Andor Series 2, we're finally getting Series 1 figures, and both I see Funko are now finally coming out with more Andor characters in their line, and I'm so excited. Dedra took far too long. She might not be in every episode, but she was so striking, and I think she was just such a standout character. I loved seeing Denise in Celebration London, and I thought it was interesting, just as a quick little note, when I got her in the mail, the supplier that shipped it to me used actually the Hasbro stock box for this figure. Now, usually the Hasbro figures come in an assortment wave. You usually get, 5 or 6 different figures and a couple of double-ups. The box for Dedra actually comes with 8 pieces of Dedra Meero. I've not really seen that very often, certainly not locally. We generally only get the assortments that include multiple characters. So hopefully that means that if you are on the hunt for Dedra Meero, she shouldn't be too hard to find if she's actually being shipped in cases of 8. Maybe that explains why I haven't been able to find her locally. Maybe a few suppliers are a little bit shy about buying 8 of a single character, but she is such a standout. I really hope that everyone that wants her will be able to get her, especially since if you're keen to do some customizing, she is so unique, a female Imperial character with just different proportions to so many of the other Imperials. She'd be really fun to sort of flesh out some Imperial themes. And I just want to quickly test, because I've got these two together. I really want to see if Gertrude's hat would actually fit on her. So her bun in the back kind of sits it up a little bit higher, and it's a little bit loose, but it kind of works. It's a little bit thick, I gotta be honest, because her hair is so flat, but I was just kind of curious to see if that would have worked. I think she needs her own custom hat, but yeah, it's fun. I love seeing the Imperials all lined up. They don't get quite as much love as Stormtroopers, of course, when it comes to Imperial characters, but they're so important for Star Wars storytelling, and she was so important for Andor, so I'm really excited to see her finally in hand. And I get the feeling I might want to pick up another one of her, because she's just really cool. I was a little bit torn when I got her in the mail, because her backing card does look really cool, and for specific characters that I really love, I kind of give myself the allowance and leeway to collect both a carded and a loose figure, but I really wanted to get this one out and add it to my Andor display, because there's just not enough figures from Andor in the 3.75-inch line. There's not too many, so I wanted to get her out so I can start building that up in preparation for Andor Series 2. I can't wait. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up another Star Wars action figure and had a lot of fun checking out the details. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again very soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a vintage collection fan, I recently opened up Grand Admiral Thrawn VC347. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole vintage collection playlist. This is the way.